Good afternoon. I will call to order the January 11th, 2016 meeting of the Minneapolis City Planning Commission. My name is Matt Brown. I serve as president of the commission. I'm joined today by Commissioners Kronzer, Magrino, Slack, Rockwell, and Gisselman. Our first item of business today is to approve the actions from the December 7th, 2015 meeting. Commissioners may have a motion to approve those actions. So moved. We have a motion and a second. All in favor? And that motion carries. The next item of business is to sort the agenda. We'll determine which items we will discuss, which will be on consent, and which will be continued. The agendas, or hard copies of the agendas, can be found in the hallway. So we'll start at the top of the agenda. And our first item of business is a comprehensive plan amendment pertaining to a very high density residential land use category. Is there anyone wishing to speak in opposition to or modify the staff recommendation on that item? I see someone. Okay, we have a few people. So we'll discuss item number 1. Item 2 is at 3200 Bryant Avenue South. That's a rezoning. Is there anyone wishing to speak in opposition to or modify the staff recommendation on that item? All right, and we will discuss item 2. Item 3 is DLTL Ventures LLC at 416 35th Avenue Northeast. That's a conditional use permit to allow a recycling facility, as well as a site plan. Is there anyone wishing to speak in opposition to or modify the staff recommendation on item 3? All right, we'll discuss item 3. Moving along, item 4 is the AMP House at 3255 Garfield Avenue South. We will discuss that item if there is anyone here for that. Item 5 is the DTE ATM variances at 510 and 640 South 4th Street. That item will be continued to the January 25th meeting. Item 6 is the Block 68 North office building at 513 South 3rd Street. Is there anyone wishing to speak in opposition to or modify the staff recommendation on that item? Seeing no one, we will put that on consent. Item 7 is at 3041 Holmes Avenue South. Several applications there for a new residential building. Is there anyone wishing to speak in opposition to or modify the staff recommendation on item 7? Item 7. Seeing no one, we will put that on consent. And then item 8 is an apartment building at 117 27th Avenue Southeast. Several applications there. Is there anyone wishing to speak in opposition to or modify the staff recommendation on that item? Item 8. Seeing no one, we will put that on consent. So our amended agenda is as follows. We will discuss items 1, 2, 3, and 4. We'll continue item 5 to the January 25th meeting. And items 6, 7, and 8 will be on consent. May I have a motion to approve the agenda as amended? We have a motion and a second. All in favor? And that motion carries. Next, we'll move on to the Committee of the Whole consent agenda. The Committee of the Whole last met back on December 10th. And Commissioner Slack, do you have an update?
Thank you, President Brown. At the December 10th Committee of the Whole meeting, we had 6 different presentations. The first project that we reviewed was 2nd Avenue North and Van Wyck Memorial Boulevard redevelopment plan. And the recommended motion was to approve the staff report that the item was consistent with the Minneapolis plan. Items 2, 3, and 4 were all land sales. Those land sales occur at 3110 Lindale Avenue North, 3116 Lindale Avenue North, 617 Lowry Avenue North, 31176 Street North, 31136 Street North, as well as a land sale at 2806 Park Avenue South, and then last but not least, a land sale at 33rd Street South, which is the Nicollet Block Hotel. The recommended motion there was to approve the staff report that each of those items was consistent with the Minneapolis plan. Item number 5 was the modification number 125 to the Common Development Redevelopment Plan and Common TIF Plan, and modification number 1 to the Lake and Nicollet Redevelopment Plan. And the motion there was to approve staff report that the item was consistent with the Minneapolis plan. And then last but not least, we were presented with 3 appointments to the Board of Adjustments. And so the recommended motion was that the City Council approve the following appointments to the Board of Adjustment for terms to expire December 31st, 2018. And those individuals are Eric Johansson, Richard Sandberg, and Amy Thompson.
All right. Thank you, Vice President Slack. I will take that as a motion to approve the Committee of the Whole consent agenda. Is there a second? We have a motion and a second. All in favor? Aye. And that motion carries. Next, we'll move on to the public hearing portion of our meeting. At this time, I'll open the public hearing for the items on the consent agenda. That is items 6, 7, and 8. Is there anyone wishing to speak on items 6, 7, and 8? Seeing no one, I will close the public hearing and may have a motion to approve the items on the consent agenda. Second. We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion on those items? Seeing none, all in favor? Aye. And that motion carries. Next, we'll move on to our items for discussion. We'll start with item 1, which is a comprehensive plan amendment related to a very high density land use category. Staff is Hyla Mays.
Good evening. I am here to speak on the Very High Density Comprehensive Plan Amendment as it's shown in the packet before you. The start of this amendment process was back last spring. There's been some discussion for some time about our comprehensive plan and about the update process. We are still planning to do a fuller update, but this is bringing forward for priority consideration a small and as narrowly as we can defined amendment to the plan to address a specific issue. As you would know, in the existing comprehensive plan, there are land use designation categories that are tied to our land use features. Low, medium, high, and very high residential are different categories of growth and development. They are identified in our plan related to the land use features as shown on this map. Can't see all the details, but they include guidance for the areas known as growth centers and activity centers, which are guided for the very highest density categories. This is sort of given as a general policy statement, and the guidance for very high density residential is identified by a range of dwelling units. This discussion this past spring turned to the fact that our plan as written has an inconsistency in the language. This has come up before, but it has been sort of brought to our attention by a couple of recent development projects, which I'll describe. As currently written, there's 2 different references to the very high density residential category. One listed as the category having densities of 120 units per acre or higher, and in another location it's listed as 120 to 200 dwelling units per acre, having an upper limit of 200. This inconsistency, it hasn't really gotten a lot of attention or needed to be addressed, except to the fact that we are seeing higher and higher density projects. The impetus for this was a discussion around about half a dozen different projects that have been considered in recent months or in the past year or so that have been pushing up against the 200 dwelling units per acre. If you have questions about how that upper limit was originally selected, part of the answer is that the Met Council does require an upper limit. They sort of end up to allow more discretion. They don't feel comfortable with that. They want a number. And at the time this plan was written, 200 seemed like a good upper limit. Development community since then has shown us that there are a lot of interesting projects that architecturally work and work functionally, could be in line with many other city policies, but do significantly exceed 200 units per acre. The combination of discussion about the fact that it's very possible for projects, and indeed several have, exceeded the 200 units per acre, and the inconsistency in how it's stated in the plan have called the need for a specific text amendment to the comprehensive plan. As the amendment itself is fairly specific, I will put up on the screen the language that we're considering. Currently, the guidance for growth centers and activity centers, maybe you can't read that, but it's sort of a one-size-fits-all guidance in terms of the upper limit for density for all of those categories. The very high density category applies to our growth centers, of which we have 4, University of Minnesota, Downtown Core, Basque Creek Valley, and the Wells Fargo Hospitals area, which are indicated on our maps as just sort of stars. We do not have specific boundaries. And activity centers, which include a lot of different locations throughout the city. The very highest density category currently applies to all of them. But as we talked about this amendment about putting an increased upper limit, a more consistent upper limit, the distinction was made to narrow it to a smaller area to say not all activities in the city are appropriate for this level of the very highest density. So as written, it makes a distinction to say, yes, all four growth centers and the activity centers in proximity to them. And they are called out by name in this document. Specifically, they are Cedar Riverside, Dinkytown, East Hennepin, Mill District, Stadium Village, and Warehouse District. So that's activity centers that are close to or in proximity to our four growth centers. That is basically all of them. The question that comes to mind for a lot of folks is, does that mean that this applies equally to all of those and into all circumstances in those? We know already that that's not true. One thing that is very helpful in guiding the policy for our growth centers and activity centers is that we have small area plans adopted for basically all of them. As the small area plans are designed to do, they have more specific guidance in the comprehensive plan as a whole, and so they provide over and above the general guidance in the comp plan, additional guidance as to where density will be appropriate. Listed in the staff report is a list of many recent small area plans, and you'll see every growth center and every activity center has at least one recent plan that has been done. I think all of them are within the past, maybe 7 or 8 years, and most of them are within the past 5 years. So they're fresh and current. They reflect input from the neighborhood and the community, and they indeed provide more rigorous guidance than the comp plan as a whole. Indeed, I think there's a good case to be made for saying that this comprehensive plan amendment allows to help ensure that the comprehensive plan itself isn't more restrictive than the small area plans are, which already have much more specific and location-guided policy for growth and density. So that is to say that this amendment would not override the guidance in the small area plans. They are included in this package. You will also find the future land use map for each of those that shows where the densities are appropriate. That is sort of a general overview. I do want to call out one particular thing. There's been a lot of comments that have come in the past few days, and some of them have been related to recent development proposals. Looking at the time frame for this was proposed back in May. It did take a while to get to it in front of you because we needed to have extensive comment and discussion with the Met Council during the interim period. The Met Council is very concerned to make sure that we have our comprehensive plan is consistent with their regional plans, and that back and forth discussion took a number of months. So I guess that's for reference to say that the current development proposals that are before us, the fact that they may or may not coincide with this is somewhat coincidental. This amendment was planned well before the ones that are being considered right now. So it was not done by the city in direct reaction to the ones now, but rather to past ones that have been done over the past months and years that have approached and exceeded that 200 dwelling units per acre limit. It is also not overruling any other portion of the plan of policy that the city has adopted that would be more restrictive. The Met Council's review since this is a comprehensive plan amendment, that means that it still has to go to them after the Planning Commission and zoning, assuming that it's approved by City Council and Planning Commission. It will still have to go to them for a future and final review, but we've spent some time doing homework with them to feel that they're comfortable with that, so we would not have to sort of do a lot of back and forth after this process is done. Just one last reference point related to the small area plans. The map you're looking here, again, it's not terribly readable, but the downtown core area, the core area around the growth centers, is right here. And as you can see, that area has pretty solid and detailed policy guidance. Again, this does not replace it. And I should say it also does not overrule any of the guidance in the heritage preservation overlays and historical districts within this area because, as you know, several of these activity centers also have historical districts. I'll pause there and see if there's any questions.
All right.
For staff.
Commissioner Bender, do you have a question for staff?
Yes, thank you, Mr. President. I wondered if you could talk about how the density interacts with the bulk regulations that we have. So my understanding here is that we're regulating the inside of buildings, right? So how many units per acre are happening within the building envelope, and then that we're separately regulating the building envelope through our bulk and size guidance. Does this, since it's in the comprehensive plan, does our density categories inform the bulk regulations, or is it really kind of a separate issue within our policy framework? That's one question. And then a second question, and I don't expect you to have the specifics, but I wonder if you could talk a bit about how, if there are other areas in the city that were considered where you might see bulk requirements already that would allow this kind of density, but that were not chosen to be included. And then I'll just comment briefly that, I think it's reasonable to say there are some parts of the city where we think it's appropriate to have just density in and of itself, number of people per acre, right? But I do think, generally speaking, if we're already having the bulk of a building, in my mind, there are also a lot of benefits to having a high acre people per acre within those buildings, relatively speaking. And you see beautiful buildings that are actually pretty moderate in scale that have a surprisingly high unit per acre density. So San Francisco, for example, all of those beautiful 6-story buildings have densities that would really surprise people, I think. They don't have parking, so they're not wasting space on cars. They have 100 or more units per acre. So I just wondered if you could talk through some of those issues. So number one was, are we using density as the how are we using it relative to bulk regulations? And then talking more about if there were any other areas of the city that were considered for inclusion and that were not included.
Sure. That's a very good point, which I probably should highlight. This does not impact or override our bulk regulations. And as the Planning Commission is aware, there have been some recent changes to sort of move the regulation more away from the units per acre standard and more towards sort of the bulk standard as a way of measuring it, because it is a better indicator in a lot of ways of the impact, especially the visual impact of building on a community. There are some extremely dense projects, for instance. I know in the Ventura Village area, some of those older small brick apartment buildings are remarkably dense because they have very small units. So it is often deceptive, can be more dense than one would think, based on because of unit size. So this does not impact those. And indeed, I think the general thinking is probably, as we are working on the comprehensive plan amendment overall, there is going to be more and more a focus on bulk as opposed to units per acres account. We are not tackling that whole question for the comp plan because we have our upcoming comp plan amendment to take it on a larger scale. So in some ways, this is effectively an interim because we will be addressing all of these in more detail in the near future. In terms of other areas, we did talk about sort of, generally speaking, the activity centers as a whole. There's not to say that they couldn't be considered in the future. I should also clarify, the way this is written, activity centers that are not explicitly called out here would be at the 200 units per acre, the sort of, I want to say the default setting, that the already present limit would be applying to those. So it's not reducing or really changing it for other areas in the city. I think the idea was that the focus on the downtown core, focus on the major transit lines and the major density that is around the key growth center areas. Again, more exploration. It could be a broader area, but that seemed to be a good starting place. So.
All right. Are there any further questions of staff? If there are none, I'll open the public hearing at this time. And just so I have a sense, how many of you are here to speak on this item? We have a handful. You can decide among yourselves who goes first. Maybe we can start over at this side of the room. Please come to the microphone and state your name and address for the record. And since we do have a number of speakers, I'll just ask that you're mindful of not repeating things that other people have said and keep your remarks relatively concise. Go ahead.
Since this is my first time at any meeting like this, I don't know what the protocol is, but my name is Ron Van Tine, and I live at 45 University Avenue Southeast in Minneapolis, 55414, and I've been a resident there for 9 years. My observation, which I'd like you to consider, is I think this change is unwise public policy. To begin with, it's a huge change, going from 200 units to 800 in one fell swoop. That's a multiple of 4 times to cure an inconsistency where something says 120 in one place and 200. You could easily change the 120 to 200 so it was the same in both places as opposed to addressing it with a magnitude of 4. But more importantly than that, I think, my concern is including all of these activity centers in the same category as the downtown core of Minneapolis, because these are largely residential neighborhoods. And I live in one of those residential neighborhoods. We know it as Nicollet Island East Bank, and the plan is called East Hennepin. And we're a low to mid-rise neighborhood that is between 2 other low to mid-rise neighborhoods. And we are also very much in the center of the St. Anthony Falls Historic District. It kind of staggers the imagination of those of us who live there to think about buildings of the scale that would be authorized here. And let me use as an illustration a proposal, and this is not to talk about that proposal, good or bad, but just know some dimensions. So a proposal called a lattice 40-story building. It would have between 240 and 290 residential units. If you take that number of units in 40 stories and assume the same distribution of 1, 2, and 3 bedrooms to get to 800, a density of 800 units, you'd have a building on that little corner, which is only 1 acre. In fact, it's 0.8829 of 1 acre. You'd have a building of 110 to 133 stories. Now, on its face, that seems pretty ludicrous. And to place into a statute something that would allow that sort of nonsensical result, I think doesn't make sense and doesn't reflect well upon us. There was conversation about how this is designed mainly to cure an inconsistency in the comprehensive plan. I think by curing this small inconsistency, 120 versus 200 units, we would be creating a much greater inconsistency. And I would direct your attention to section 10.1 of the comprehensive plan. It's very short, so I'll just read it so you don't have to Google it. Policy 10.1. Promote building designs and heights that enhance and complement the image and form of the downtown skyline, providing transition to the edges of downtown and protect the scale and quality in areas of distinctive physical or historical character. Protect the scale and quality in areas of distinctive physical or historical character. The first subsection, there are only 3, says, quote, concentrate the tallest buildings in the downtown core. Now, I don't personally have any quarrel with the 800. I think that size is probably a generation away in terms of construction in our community. If it belongs anywhere, it belongs in the downtown core. It does not belong in activity centers, particularly such as the East Hennepin. And 10.1 also talks about the importance of preserving and enhancing public view corridors on natural features like water bodies. I would assume the Mississippi River qualifies as a water body, and trying to not pack a lot of 40, 50, 60-story buildings, 30-story buildings in that area would be desirable. Lastly, and finally, I would suggest that I have a sense from conversations with various people that the 800 is kind of a plug number. It's designed to set a standard so high that you just don't have to worry about anybody arguing about whether or not a project meets it or not. That it would be extremely rare, at least in our lifetimes, that there's going to be a project of that scale. Therefore, that eliminates one topic for discussion in the neighborhood as to what is or is not appropriate in that particular neighborhood. And again, I'm talking neighborhood as opposed to downtown. The other thing that concerns me is there has been no discussion about what's the ripple effect of increasing this limit. What other obligations or requirements that now exist on a developer or a neighborhood or benefit one or the other might be affected by this change? I understand, I don't claim to be authoritative on it, That it would eliminate the requirement for most developments, maybe all, to be obligated under state law to do an environmental awareness worksheet. Well, that very much works to the benefit of the developer. It doesn't do anything for the neighbors who want to understand, what is the impact on traffic, on pollution, on sun and shadow, et cetera, of our neighborhood of having a building of a particular size or density. I think those are all really important considerations for the people who live in these neighborhoods. And so I would urge you to consider splitting out activity centers from the downtown core in any kind of increase and suggest that an appropriate density for the activity centers would be something close to the upper limit that currently exists, 200. So there still is a basis for discussion and reflection on all the ramifications that projects of that size or greater may entail. So thank you for your patience.
All right. Thank you. Next speaker. Please state your name and address for the record.
Yes, my name is Dale Aaron. I live at 110 Bank Street Southeast, 55414. That is also the East Bank neighborhood. Ron has said very well, I think, what we're thinking about some of the details of this. The questions that I would ask specifically of the commission are the purported reasons to do this. There were two named, I think, in what I read, which is we must have, the goal is to resolve existing inconsistencies in the existing buildings and existing area. And then secondly, to more accurately reflect the city's goals for the growth and achievable density limits for that category. My question would be, first of all, the existing inconsistency seems to me can easily be taken care of by writing and passing an exception for buildings that need it. That should not be much of a problem. My concern about the additions primarily relate to the fact that I am under the understanding that a new comprehensive plan is under development. My point would be that you seem to be already putting into ink something that would be part of the new comprehensive plan that has not been considered by anybody. And nobody really knows the implication of this 800 rule on what that comprehensive plan would be. So I think it's premature to do that part. Secondly, the amendment clearly implies that SAPs are the noted guideline, and that's why we were told you did not have to worry about that. My question is, how does the SAP relate to historic guidelines? Some are new, some are older. If you do live in a historic district, how does this amendment apply to it? It's just, there is absolutely no indication. Finally, I do think it is good. Ron talked about the ALITIS. I'm more interested in buildings in general. If you pick any site, Superior Plating, for example, 5 acres, does this clearly mean 4,000 people could live there? We have no comparison when you say 800. I don't think any neighborhood, anybody has any idea what that means. So I would ask you to reconsider that. My only suggestion is to take care of the exceptions as they stand, do a much more modest, as Ron said, change to continue our development. And then particularly, I would also say pay more attention to not dealing with the activity centers right now until the comprehensive plan is formed, and also how are the historic standards going to fit into that. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Next speaker. Please come to the microphone and state your name and address for the record.
My name is Barbara Cam. I live at 423 7th Street Southeast. I'm here as a member of Preserve Historic Dinkytown and as a resident of Marcy Homes. I'm very concerned about this amendment. The situation that is proposed, the situation that the amendment proposes to resolve is that there's one place in the comprehensive plan text that does not give a limit for the very high density category and others where the upper limit is set to 200 units per acre. Densities up to 800 units per acre are being proposed as being achievable and consistent with city goals and policies, as my predecessors in this speaking have mentioned. The intent is to address this issue before review of the comprehensive plan. The staff report states, if this is not remedied, it could create an administrative burden for the development projects that the city would otherwise support. It appears that this really is a major change. It quadruples the density potential of proposed projects and claims that this density is proven to be consistent with the development of vital and livable communities, particularly in the core areas of Minneapolis. As Hyla has said, the comprehensive plan requires the city to develop small area plans for the activity centers. The purpose of those small area plans is to mitigate impacts to community character and provide further guidance as to how policy designations are to be applied. What is happening, however, is that the density designations are used to override the provisions of the small area plans for character, scale, and livability. And what is that administrative burden? Is it land use committees and neighborhood organizations who would contest such development density to ensure vitality and livability of their neighborhoods? What is equally curious is the proposed targets being called out in the amendment. It includes the oldest and most historically significant neighborhoods in the city and 2 neighborhoods that have been historically designated. Does this amendment override that designation? And for Dinkytown, how does it affect the 2 half blocks that weren't historically designated? And does it mean that there's a potential of 1,600 more people living in Dinkytown? It appears that this amendment is jumping the gun to put developers out ahead of the public comprehensive plan update discussion.